At Foodbank, we feed over 1 million people every month, so we can't rely on donations alone. With the increasing demand for food relief and a focus on reducing waste, we work with manufacturers and their suppliers to create a reliable supply of everyday food items. This includes fruit and vegetables, bread, meat, milk, pasta and pasta sauce, recipe bases, coffee, and more. Together, we're making sure that these everyday items are available for people in need, no matter their situation. Visit our website to learn more or to contribute to our mission of feeding Aussies in need.
Good morning.
Looks like technology's conspiring against you, Jeremy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's my turn to have network issues. Brianna, welcome to the Impact Leaders webinar series. Great to see you again. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be chatting today.
No, absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you, and working with Foodbank has been such an honor. It's one of our longest running partnerships, and I'm always very humbled and excited to see how much we're able to raise for a number of our NGO partners now, and we'll talk about shortly around the impact that we're able to generate through the technology that we've built. But this session is about you. This is about the work that you do. Brianna, perhaps, this is the whole NGO. I mean, our goal here is to demystify the extraordinary work that NGOs do in Australia and around the world. And what we recognise is that there's often a profound lack of understanding around the sector, which employs 1 in 10 Australians approximately, and is an enormous industry and enormously valuable. And the food sector as well has its own complexities based on what you uniquely do. So can you talk to us about what Foodbank does, and also sort of what role you specifically and uniquely play in the deployment of food to families and individuals in need around the country?
Thank you, Jeremy. And you're right, the NGO sector in Australia and abroad has never been more important than it is right now. And I think we only need to think about what the everyday Australian is going through right now to understand why demand for frontline support from frontline charities is so important. But from a Foodbank point of view, we are here for the everyday Australians who are going without. And we need to be really honest and understand that 3.7 million households across Australia have experienced food insecurity in the last 12 months. So Foodbank is here to help those households get access to what has become increasingly difficult to secure, which is healthy, fresh food. And we're here essentially to connect those in need of food relief with those essential items that we really focus on being culturally appropriate, nutritious, and really filling the tummies of those who need our help right now.
You're the CEO of Foodbank. What inspired you specifically to choose and work for Foodbank Australia?
It's a number of things, and it's a bit of a long story, so I'll start at the beginning. I grew up in Byron Bay in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, and it's a beautiful town, and I grew up with a very strong focus on sustainability, and my grandparents were on the land up in the hills behind Byron Bay in a little town called Bangalow, multi-generational farmers. So I grew up, one, with a very healthy respect for nature, the environment, sustainability, but more importantly, sustainable farming practices, and went on to study environmental science and worked for Queensland Farmers Federation and then New South Wales Farmers. So very strong focus on the role that rural and regional communities play in terms of sustainable agricultural production, and quite specifically, the critically important role of producing the world's best quality fresh fruit and vegetables, dairy, meat, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very healthy and strong interest in sustainable agricultural practices. I've also always had a very strong focus on social policy. I am passionate about social justice. I have always been focused on sharing the voice of those who don't traditionally have a voice. And for me, Foodbank has been this beautiful marriage of my passion for social policy and social justice issues and connecting with the food and grocery industry, who work so hard each and every day to make sure that we as Australians have access to world-class food. And from a social policy point of view, what horrifies me is that right here in the lucky country, where we assume that we have so many luxuries and have access to all the things that we need, we have this scenario where so many people are struggling to put a meal on the table. And when we launched this year's Foodbank Hunger Report, not even a month ago, I think what surprised me the most, and we've been releasing this report for more than a decade, is this year beyond any, people really saw themselves in this report. I don't think people need to think too creatively to understand just how challenging it is right now when all of your expenses are outpacing the rate of growth in your income. If we look at the housing affordability crisis that's going on, accessibility problems, we've seen results this week that paint a really troubling picture about housing security in Australia. We look at the cost of food and groceries. We look at the cost of utilities, putting petrol in the car if you're lucky enough to have a vehicle, or accessing public transport. All of that is growing at a really rapid rate, yet our incomes aren't keeping up with that. And I think what will surprise many people is that 60% of those experiencing food insecurity have at least one person in employment. So the face of hunger in Australia is changing. And for me, what gets me out of bed each and every day is making sure that every Australian out there who needs food relief has access to it.
So let's talk numbers. Currently, how many Australians approximately are experiencing what you'd call food stress or food insecurity, and what does that actually mean?
So first things first, food insecurity, it's a really technical term. There's a United Nations definition. I want to be real about it. Food insecurity is waking up in the morning and not having access to breakfast. Food insecurity is being an older person and suddenly thinking that 2 meals a day is acceptable because you don't have enough resources to make 3. Food insecurity is leaving family and domestic violence with your children and not actually having food to provide for them. So it's about not having access to regular nutritious food to lead a healthy and active life. And the reality is, right here in Australia, we're facing a situation where 3.7 million Australian households have experienced that in the last 12 months. And if you want to put that into a picture that makes it real, that's more than the total number of households across Sydney and Melbourne combined. So we're dealing with a huge number of households, and food insecurity is a spectrum. It can range from feeling anxious or worried about whether or not you've got enough money to buy food for yourself or your family or loved ones, through to actively skipping meals and making compromises in the type of food that you're eating, right through to sometimes going entire days without eating. And of huge concern to us is that we have got so many people now sitting that extreme food insecurity category where they are routinely skipping meals, they're going entire days without eating. And I'm deeply concerned about what that means from a health and wellbeing point of view. One, from a physical health point of view, when we know that at least half of food insecure households have reduced their access to fresh fruit and vegetables and to protein. What does that mean for health, particularly for vulnerable cohorts like children and older Australians? But also, what does this mean for mental health? The stress and pressure and this constant weight on your shoulders of constantly worrying about whether or not you can eat that day or whether you can send kids off to school in the morning with a full tummy. I'm really worried about what's happening right now in Australia, and I think it's never been a more important time for us to be in food relief. I've never been prouder to be a food bank. I'm so grateful for the support that you provide us, Jeremy, and all of the partners through I equals Change, because we need to make sure this is a whole of community effort here. We have far too many people struggling right now.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, actually the first of these webinars we did was with Plan Australia, looking at the hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa. And we've traditionally associated these kinds of crises with parts of the world like Africa, and to begin to understand the extent to which it's impacting Australian families. And what is it, about 1 in 5, 1 in 6?
Yeah, I mean, it is just shocking. It is.
Yeah.
It is truly shocking. But I think if we hark back to what was going on through COVID, we can understand how this is happening to so many. I think all of us knew someone who lost hours or lost employment during COVID. And it's not hard when you lose that income to imagine a scenario when you're tallying up the household budget, and the only thing that's left to cut from that budget is food. And I think the really shocking statistic for me is that we have got so many more people now experiencing food insecurity than we did at the height of COVID. Many of you would remember those incredibly memorable scenes of people queuing around the block trying to access food relief or trying to get to Centrelink during the height of COVID. Demand for food relief right now is significantly higher than it was back then. It's just not as visible.
Yeah, and we have these structural challenges which none of us can control, right? Inflation, interest rates, overall
and
cost of living.
That's why we're seeing a real shift in who's experiencing food insecurity. We know that 77% of people experiencing food insecurity are doing so for the very first time. Hunger is touching households and people it's never touched before. And it's creating some real challenges for us as food banks around the country in how best we can meet the need of this new face of hunger. When we talk about the fact that 60% of those experiencing food insecurity have a job, we need to think about the hours that food banks are open, because if we're only open 9 till 5 and the frontline charities that we provide food relief to are only open Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, we are missing those who are in full-time employment. So we're increasingly seeing food banks who are conducting pop-ups and bringing food bank to communities. We're seeing people opening on weekends, on Thursday nights, because we have to make sure that accessibility isn't a barrier to people being able to access food relief. We also need to think about the type of food that we're providing. And when we hark back to what this year's Foodbank Hunger Report has told us about fresh fruit and vegetables and protein, we need to redouble our efforts to get that. And to give some relevance and to unpack how Y equals change helps Foodbank, your contribution and your generosity and kindness helps what we call our Key Staples program. And to understand what that does, it's really important to understand how Foodbank gets its food, because we work directly with farmers, with manufacturers and with retailers to rescue food and groceries that might not look quite right. We're talking about the watermelons that are too big to carry, the bananas that are too big for lunch boxes. We're talking about products that may not look quite right, but gosh, they're delicious. They still provide nutrients. I would feed them to my family. We want to make sure that those products don't end up in landfill. We want to make sure they end up in the tummies of vulnerable Australians. So we've worked really hard to rescue them. So for us, it's not a supply chain, it's actually a surprise chain. We never know day in, day out what we're going to have donated to us, and we love that. But we know year round, there are certain products we're always going to need access to for those that we are serving either directly or through the frontline charities, of which there are about 3,000 nationally. So we need to find a way to convert that surprise chain into a supply chain and bring regularity. And your support of our Key Staples program allows us to do that, because we can secure those products that we wouldn't be able to get through food rescue. And these are everyday staple products like rice and breakfast cereals and fruits and vegetables and milk, and to be able to give confidence to people that they can access those products routinely, and not just if the surprise chain delivers, means that we can give people a truly impactful experience. It really does make a world of difference.
I think it's such a important and profound realization, is that we think of those in hunger, of those experiencing this kind of hunger, those who are not employed for whatever reason, but to know that there are people employed who we will be interacting within our workplaces who might be skipping a meal is tragic. And so, to me, that opens up an opportunity for us internally within teams to kind of be alert. Like if it's 1 in 5, 1 in 6, right? Like how can we actually, because it's something that someone I imagine would be quite, even embarrassed about or ashamed and hide the fact that they can't afford lunch. And so it strikes me as actually an opportunity for us as Australians to be looking out for each other in the workplace.
Spot on.
In a way we haven't.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think what we are seeing now is people would have historically thought about hunger impacting homeless people living on the street, and it does. But it also impacts people living on my street and your street. And we are increasingly seeing it playing out in the workplace. And you're right, if you pay attention, you'll see it in your workplace. It is astonishing how many conversations I have with people where they say, actually, I've noticed that our fruit bowl that we have in the staff room at work, we used to replenish that once a week. We're now having to replenish it daily. I talk to people who say, when we have a working lunch, I see people absolutely making a beeline for the fruit platter instead of the sandwiches because that's the only access to fresh fruit and vegetables they have in the day. We're seeing people coming to work earlier because they know they can have breakfast and use the milk that's in the staff room in the staff kitchen. It's these little things that might pass you by that if you suddenly look under the skin of, you can see it happening. And it's about the conversations that we have in our community. I landed at the airport recently and was chatting to an Uber driver and asked whether his day had just started. This was at about 8 o'clock in the evening. He works full time during the day, works really hard during the day. He's bought his first home for his wife and his child who have come here as new Australians in the last 18 months. He's desperate to maintain that house. He doesn't want to lose the house. So he works full time during the day. He comes home in the evening. He sits down with his daughter and his wife. He baths his daughter and pops her into bed, and then he gets in an Uber at 6:30 p.m. and he drives till 2:30 in the morning. He comes home and sleeps for a few hours, and then he gets up and he does it all again the next day. That is what hunger looks like in Australia. That is who it's impacting. It is everyday people who are working really hard to keep a roof over their heads. And food has suddenly become a discretionary item. We need to make sure that we are addressing the root causes of why this is happening in the first place. We know that the rates of job seeker and related payments are too low. We know the housing crisis is causing conflict. We know that each and every time the Reserve Bank increases the cash rate and our lenders pass that on, we brace at Foodbank because we know what's about to happen next. It's those everyday costs.
It's sort of immediate, isn't it? That impact on
it really
people's hunger.
It really is.
I'm just wondering, can you talk us through the model of Foodbank and even what shifted programmatically for you over the last 12 months, just to help our listeners understand, here's how you access food, here's how you distribute it, and here's how it ends up on the plates of Australians.
If we go back to the origins of Foodbank, it was about ensuring that food is not wasted and rescuing food and fighting hunger at the same time. And as we've evolved, we have grown the network of food and grocery donors who contribute to Foodbank. So about 70% of our total food relief volumes come from food rescue, and the remaining 30% we either buy or manufacture. So those relationships with farmers and the food and grocery industry are critically important. That food comes into a Foodbank warehouse, and there are Foodbank warehouses in every capital city across Australia. And historically, we would be the kitchen pantry to the frontline charities across Australia. We would provide the food and groceries that all of your household charities that you would know, Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, Anglicare, local refugee asylum seeker centres, domestic violence shelters, they get their food from us. So when clients are in a period of distress, they would come to a frontline charity, they would need food relief as part of a series of wraparound support services, and we'd be really proud to provide that food into those food relief, into those frontline charities. As we have seen the face of hunger change in Australia and where support is needed, we've had to broaden the scope of what we offer. So if we look at South Australia, Northern Territory, Western Australia, they are opening a number of frontline hubs. So you'll see Foodbank hubs in regional areas which for all intents and purposes look like a miniature supermarket. Clients are coming into food banks with a voucher from a frontline charity, and they're able to select the products that they want that are relevant to themselves and their families to be able to take it home and make food one less thing to worry about. So we're seeing a lot more direct to client. We're also seeing a lot more focus on school breakfast programs, because when we look at how many children across Australia are in households experiencing food insecurity, we need to make sure that we're getting to those children. And for those of you out there who are parents, it doesn't take much for your child to shift from hungry to hangry. We know that there are behavioural consequences when children are hungry, and it affects their growth, their maturation, their mental health and well-being. So we have more than 3,000 schools across Australia right now who are receiving school breakfast programs, either delivered by or fueled by food banks, to make sure we can start those children's day in the best possible way. And what's really shifted dramatically in the last 2 to 3 years has been a focus on natural disaster preparedness and responsiveness, because the changing climate that we are facing right now is meaning we are seeing increased frequency and severity of natural disasters, be they droughts, floods, fires, and we are seeing communities being impacted by those disasters so routinely that each and every year we go into the disaster season, and it's already upon us, needing to ensure that we have bottled water and emergency relief hampers available at key locations so that we can deploy them really rapidly to make sure that food relief can get into those communities, so displaced communities, first responders and so on, through the crisis phase. But what we know from experience is when you have been through the absolute worst and you've lost your home, or it's been flooded, or it's no longer inhabitable, we have to work really hard in that really long, complex recovery phase. And to give you some perspective, communities that were impacted by the Black Summer bushfires in 2019, 2020, food banks are still providing food relief into those communities right now, almost 4 years later. So food banks...
Just to touch on that point, it's so critical, because even like you look at Lismore, right, the floods around the northern rivers, right, which is your home.
It's my backyard. Yes.
Your backyard, right, and these communities are still recovering, and it takes years for communities to get back on their feet. And in some respects, it's both the great thing about the media, but also the challenge is that a spotlight is shone. A few weeks later they move on. I mean, who remembers what happened in Libya? Right, about 5 weeks ago? No one, right? It's been eclipsed by the horror of Israel and Gaza, and we're not even hearing about what's happening in Russia currently. And so, to put that at a very local level, there are so many communities still recovering from, as you say, natural disasters and their implications, let alone just that simmering everyday hunger which is going on in front of us, and we largely don't see it.
It's right there. When those two worlds collide, which is that really challenging space for us, because you're right, let's talk about this more. They have seen the absolute worst that Mother Nature has thrown at them. And we work so hard with communities to ensure they understand Foodbank will be right there to wrap our arms around them, not just while the cameras are there, but for the months and years of recovery. And we will be there, and we continue to wrap our arms around them. The Foodbank New South Wales and ACT team was up on the Northern Rivers only a couple of weeks ago doing exactly that, to make sure that food is available. But let's think about this current disaster season. It's a hotter, drier spring and summer. We have heard all of the warnings about extreme heat. Now, how does someone who is in temporary crisis accommodation after last year's floods in Lismore, living in a donga, living in a tent, how do they shield themselves against extreme heat? They can't focus on insulation, they can't focus on air conditioning, they can't focus on the many things that they can do to their home to shield against extreme heat. They're in crisis accommodation. So this constant piece of exacerbating one challenge after another, it's cascading crises where we're seeing cost of living crisis colliding with natural disasters, colliding with intense heat waves. How do we make sure we can get to those communities? And from a food bank point of view, it's been fascinating to see where our two worlds have collided, because I've talked a lot about how climate change and how the cost of living crisis are impacting the communities that we serve, so the demand for food relief. But let's not forget it's also affecting our supply, because every time we see floods and fires in key agricultural production zones, we're getting less food and groceries provided into Foodbank.
Which increases the price of them.
Correct, and just as it costs us more to turn on the lights at home right now, it also costs us more to turn on the lights in food banks. Transport and logistics costs have gone absolutely through the roof. So the cost of food banking is increasing each and every day at the same time that demand for food relief is increasing every day. So we are in this really challenging...
almost a perfect storm.
It is, I know, I was trying to avoid that term, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I think, this really highlights the responsibility that not only we have as businesses to look out for our teams and our staff, but responsibility to our broader community. And I'm really so grateful you've shared this with obviously so much passion and expertise, because you're seeing this every day and you're working on the front lines. And this is a issue that's impacting communities, it's impacting businesses, it's impacting the country. And I know it's been discussed at a sort of at a federal level, because it does have flow-on effects for many areas of community and the economy. Let's just talk sort of the real the cost of delivering this kind of impact. So, as I mentioned, we've been a partner now for a few years, and I was so pleased the other day. I mean, we've raised over $627,000, which is it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, this is symbolic of the power of business, the power of $1 at a time, how much that can add up. Can you talk to us about where does that money go, and just sort of break that down? I mean, that's a significant amount of change. What change does that create for the communities that you're serving? Because $1 can equal 2 meals, can't it?
That's right. Every dollar donated is 2 meals created, and that's thanks to the extraordinary partnerships that we have with the food and grocery industry, that we can stretch every dollar further. But before, when I was talking about our Key Staples program, every dollar invested in our collaborative supply program delivers somewhere between $5 and $7 worth of food and groceries. So we want to make sure when people are donating to Foodbank, one, there's visibility about where that donation goes and who it's helping. But two, we want to make sure that we can get the biggest stretch on every dollar that we can. And we're really fortunate to have such great partnerships that allow us to stretch every dollar further. Because if you were to give someone a $50 voucher to go into a supermarket and get $50 worth of food, that's what they get. If you give someone a $50 voucher at a food bank, they're going to be walking away with potentially $500 worth of food, depending on what we've got available at Foodbank on that particular day. So it's about understanding that your dollar is being converted into meals that make such a difference, whether that be to children, whether that be to the elderly, whether that be people in your own street and your own community. But it also allows us to be really proactive in what we do. Because if we think about disasters for a moment, we know through Productivity Commission inquiries done by the federal government, 97% of disaster funding is spent in the crisis phase, 3% on preparedness. We have to flip that, because if we are scrambling after a flood or a fire to get food relief, to secure it, to get it into community, we're going to be paying almost retail or wholesale for those products. Whereas if we know that we can go into disaster season, we can look at the data available and know that we're going to see increased likelihood of bushfires in Queensland, we're going to see increased likelihood of bushfires in New South Wales. How do we work with our partners, with the funds that are donated to us, to secure products that we can have in key locations, get our transport partners involved, which means that it's just a really structured, organised response that the community trusts. So I want you to have confidence that when you're donating to Foodbank, not only is every dollar donated 2 meals created, but the impact that you are creating across the board is huge. The last time we did a detailed social return on investment study, we found that every kilogram of food and groceries distributed by Foodbank, it delivered a $23 social return on investment for adults. For children through our school breakfast programs, it's $110 for every kilo. Because when you are giving someone food and putting it in their belly, they can participate in work, they can participate in school, they can play in the playground, they can pursue extracurricular activities, they will go into meaningful employment. The long-term benefits of providing food relief
are life-changing.
are immeasurable. They are life-changing.
I mean, I have a big appetite, and when I get hungry and hangry, and it's a very fine line.
Yes, me too.
I can't think, we've all had that experience. It's like you can't think of anything else, and how you're meant to work,
You can't.
and how you're meant to
You
be
can't.
productive, and how you're meant to take care of people. And it's the cascading effect of that. I mean, from a Maslow-esque primary set of needs, food and shelter is obviously up there.
It's right there.
Brianna,
and yet suddenly it's become hard.
It's suddenly becoming harder. So if you were to name two unique challenges and two unique joys of your work, what would they be?
Challenges are always going to be having enough food and groceries and transport support to get the food where it's needed, when it's needed the most. That is always going to be a challenge. I'm probably the only CEO in the country with a KPI to do myself out of a job, but ultimately that's my goal. I want to wake up one morning and know that Foodbank's no longer needed. That's the dream. That's the joy. But what brings me joy is knowing that we can so significantly change the life course of someone through the simple act of sharing a meal. To know that we can work in partnership with those amazing farmers and growers out there who put blood, sweat and tears into producing world-class products that might not actually make supermarket shelves, but suddenly end up in a food bank and in the home of someone who needs it. To know that we are making the best possible use of our natural resources, the water and all of the resources that go into growing those products, that we're not wasting them. And that more importantly, we're feeding hungry people. That just brings me endless joy, because it sounds so simple. And yes, the logistics are difficult. Yes, we need funds. We need all of those things. But at the end of the day, our premise is a really simple one. We want to end hunger in Australia. It's what drives everything that we do. We want to make sure that those who need our help have got access to it. And we need to think about the fact that what we do here in Australia can have such positive ripple effects. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Thailand meeting with the Global Food Banking Network and meeting with food bankers from across the Asia Pacific region. One, it is a constant reminder of the fact that hunger lives in communities that you just wouldn't think about. If you said to a tourist, Hong Kong, Singapore, would you think that hunger lives in those communities? I'm here to tell you it does. And we are part of a global network that is fighting it each and every day. But I think the confronting piece for me is, if we've got 3.7 million households in a population as small as Australia, we're 25, 26 million people, how is this happening right now, and how do we stop it from getting worse? Because the cost of living crisis has become a cost of surviving crisis. It shouldn't have to be this hard.
And it shouldn't be
what should be a basic right.
That's right. And in a country as rich as Australia, it is a national shame. It really is.
It is a national shame.
And I mean, I'm just thinking that the 600, that's almost getting close to 1.5 million people that we've been able to impact through our retail partners. And so for any businesses listening or people working with businesses, this is a really powerful way in which you can give back. You can engage your customers to give back and to bring to life your sustainability as a business, and give back and support the extraordinary work that Foodbank is doing around Australia. And so reach out to us. Christmas is the season of giving, and it's often we spend, in fact, I heard this figure the other day, it's over $400 is often spent per person, having to make, with the pressure to give each other gifts over Christmas, right? And, to not put too fine a point on it, there's a lot of crap that gets bought, which no one really wants, no one really needs, ends up getting thrown away, right? Now, that kind of funding, right, could provide up to 800 meals, right?
That's it.
So,
and think of the difference that would make to someone's Christmas day.
100%. And so these are ways I think it's so important that we reframe and challenge ourselves with what we consider normal, which and how can that funding, if we're going to buy, we buy from brands that give back, to extraordinary NGOs working on the ground like Foodbank Australia. Brianna, I'm curious, if there's one thing that keeps you going every day, you wake up, there's probably a million emails and challenges, and what is that one thing that kind of galvanizes you that this is, you know, because I've had the honor to interview a number of NGO and impact leaders now, and you know, no one's there for the money, right, or the fame. They're there because, like you, deeply passionate about being of service and working with great people and making a difference in the lives of Australians. What keeps you going? What do you most look forward to each day?
Making a difference. It's as simple as that. Each and every day, I want to make a positive difference to what we do. I want to be a great leader to our team. I want my team to feel inspired and motivated and know that what they do contributes so meaningfully to our communities, to the people they love, to the people they don't know, to the people who really need our support right now. I want to make a difference to the discussions and the conversations that we have as Australians. I want us to be talking about hunger. I want us to break down the barriers that stop people from asking for help. We know that less than half of those who need food relief are actively seeking it because they're embarrassed or ashamed or feel like someone deserves it more than they do. I'm here to tell you, if you can't afford to put a meal on the table 3 times a day, if you are struggling to feed yourself and your family, if you're making compromises in the type of food that you're eating and how often you're eating, you need food relief, and that's exactly what we're here for. And we're so delighted to be able to help with that. We want food to be one less problem for people to worry about. The world is complicated enough each and every day without having to worry about whether or not your child can eat 2 pieces of fruit and 3 pieces of vegetable, or 5 vegetables, in fact, each and every day. I don't want children to feel ashamed about the fact that they can't do that. I don't want children hiding at recess because they don't have food in their lunchbox. I don't want pensioners sitting at home going to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening because that way they can avoid the fact they don't have to eat dinner that night because they haven't got anything for it. I want us to make a difference every day. I want to have partners like you who get why we do what we do, and you back us in and you make it easier for us to do that each and every day. And the businesses that support you through this make a difference to all of us. So that's what gets me up.
And Brianna, final question. Thank you for sharing all of that. I like to ask this at the end because I think it kind of it enables us to put a focus on kind of really what matters in many respects. In many years from now, hopefully many years, when you look back on your life, what do you believe you will be most proud of?
I think I will be proud of the fact that we named hunger in Australia, we owned it, and we did something about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your passion, your vulnerability, sharing your expertise, sharing how great the challenges are currently for so many Australians around the country. We have a question that's come in from one of our listeners. Recognising that food insecurity can impact mental health, how does Foodbank address the holistic well-being of the individuals and families you serve?
Great question, and thank you. One of the most important things that we can do as Foodbank is connect with wraparound support services. And we need to make sure that we recognise that food relief is often the canary in the coal mine. When something is going wrong at home, in a community, in a region, in a business, we see it first through hunger. And we need to make sure that we can connect people with financial counsellors, with access to bill relief, with access to mental health and support, wherever they are in community. And I think for me, what's concerning me at the moment is so many people are struggling to afford to go to a GP to ask for a mental health treatment plan and to be able to routinely get the support that they need. We need to make it easier for people to be able to access mental health support. And from an employment point of view, it's critically important that as employers, we are focusing on using services like employee assistance programs that focus on mental health and well-being, not just the crisis response when something happens in a business that's traumatic or shocking, but to make sure that we are role modeling behaviours in the workplace where we are actively and openly talking about mental health and well-being. And the same goes for food banks. We focus on resilience, we focus on our mental health and well-being, and we focus on connecting people wherever we can to the support services that they need.
Thank you for that. It's so critical, the implications of food insecurity and hunger. And Brianna, I really feel you've brought to life today an issue that lives in the shadows for most Australians, in that they don't see it, therefore they don't think it exists. And to know that 1 in 5, 1 in 6 Australians are, not living on the street necessarily, but going to work and, active members of the community, but simply not earning enough in their salaries to cover core costs, which is food, which is a human right, to be able to access enough food on a daily basis for themselves and their families. And so we also have a new business solution, so it doesn't have to be retailers. We're about to start working with law firms so they can give back around their invoicing. So for anyone out there who is also working with professional services firms, there's a whole new and simple way in which you can give back. It doesn't have to be from an online sale. It can be really any business that does business with a business, which is every business. We have a solution to make that simple and to accelerate the incredible life-changing work of Foodbank Australia. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us today. Such an honour to have you. We've taken almost 45 minutes of your time, and you have a lot of people to go and serve, and great work to continue doing. So we will keep supporting you in the sidelines. Part of our role is as a funder is to get out of the way and to trust the experts. And I think that's a whole other conversation. But it's an important point around actually by backing I Could Change NGOs, who we have done a significant amount of due diligence. We know who these incredible people are. We develop relationships with them, and we understand where the funding is going. You can be confident that you are indeed changing lives. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to supporting you in many years to come.
Many thanks.